Guys, today we have Andy Patton here with Locked On Zags. We really appreciate Andy for coming out today. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited to be here. Love talking Zags hoops.
I appreciate you for coming on with all of the Zag news and everything, and just everything that's been going on around the landscape. You were the first person that I thought of for like the last like month and a half, 2 months. I'm like, dang, I need to hit up Andy. So I really appreciate you for coming on. We'll just get right into it. This is obviously part two, so I kind of just want your like what you've been doing more recently since the last time we've talked. It's been about like 8 months. I see you're on like billboards and or not billboards, but like in like New York and like
Yeah.
kind of explain to everybody what's been going on.
Yeah. So obviously, been hosting Locked On Zags podcast for now, entering my what'll be my third season doing that. Locked On College Basketball is the other show. I'm entering my third season on Locked On College Basketball, so I guess fourth season hosting Locked On Zags. Third season entering Locked On College Basketball. I'm a co-host there with my partner Isaac Shade, who also hosts the Locked On Tar Heels podcast. So those two shows, both 5 days a week shows, Locked On Podcast Network. I'm also writing right now for USA Today at a website called College Sports Wire. Cover college basketball primarily there. Also do some college football, some college baseball writing as well. So keeping me plenty busy. We were very fortunate. The Locked On College Basketball podcast was featured by Amazon on one of their billboards in Times Square during March Madness. So really cool to get the opportunity to see that. My co-hosts actually flew out to New York and got to look live at the billboard with our logo on it. So that was extremely cool. Absolute blast getting a chance to cover this sport, to talk about it. It's a clearly insane time in college athletics in general, just with NIL and transfer portal and realignment and all the chaos and craziness that's happening. And Gonzaga continues to be in a phenomenal spot and just set up for what I think is going to be a fantastic season next year.
Most definitely. Okay, so what kind of content are you guys putting out on that page?
For the writing,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just a little bit of everything. I just was writing about Drew Timmy having a great summer league. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. Talking about various different things happening in college athletics, recruiting, transfer portal stuff. Just a little bit of everything there. Trying to right now the busy stuff. It's the slow time for both football and basketball, but we got Olympics coming up, and there's some kind of college angles we can take with some of that Olympic coverage, including Gonzaga women's basketball player Yvonne Ejim, who's representing Canada's women's national team. So always finding ways to connect the sports world to college athletics.
I'm glad you brought up the Olympics. We're going to talk some Olympic basketball as well later on. I heard a mailbag question. I think it was a mailbag question a couple days ago about your starting five Gonzaga team and could they beat the USA team? I don't know if it was could they beat the USA team, but maybe you just uh, we'll get into it though. But kind of explain what you do to like study and things like that to get ready for your podcast. How do you go about taking in your information?
Yeah, it's probably my favorite part of the show, and one of the reasons I love the off season is because it kind of forces me to be a little bit more creative at times in terms of trying to figure out what to talk about and making sure I'm not missing any news. I was very fortunate today, as I usually record the night before for the next morning, but I waited to record until this morning, and then there was a news report that Gonzaga is going to bring a recruit onto campus. So I was like, thankfully, I waited, so now I have something to actually talk about. That was just lucky that happened today, but I have a note sheet that I Monday through Friday, a different sheet for every day, and I update it every time I hit that day with the ad reads, make sure they're all squared away, all that good stuff, and then I just kind of plop in whatever I'm thinking of. I try to keep a running tab of like, here's my plan for the week, and I adjust it basically every single day depending on whether breaking news happens, whether a guest cancels on me, various different things that might happen that cause me to kind of have to change the plan. I'm always tinkering with it a little bit. Have a lot of great sites out there that are great resources for data, proballers.com for pro Zags who are not playing in the NBA, basketball reference, baseball reference for the MLB Zags, obviously the Gonzaga website. Evan Miyakawa's website is a huge source for me. He has a transfer portal database tracking all of the transfers in college basketball, where they landed, how he ranks them, things like that. So there's a ton of resources out there that I'm using And then I'm just on Twitter all the time. I don't even really like Twitter anymore. I don't know if anybody does, but I'm there because it's where news breaks and it's where I can find out information. And so I'm using that throughout the day as well.
I dislike Twitter so much. I got Twitter for work, and I just dislike it.
I don't think
It's
anybody
just
who
not a
uses
fun
it
place.
regularly likes it. I don't know how you can.
Yeah, there's just too much going on there. I just will stick to Instagram and Facebook
Mm-hmm.
and those types of like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know you kind of talked about it a little bit. Let's just get right into like the Olympics and let's kind of talk players that are playing on Olympic teams right
Mm-hmm.
now. How do you know how many are on an Olympic team right now?
For, from Gonzaga, I think there is five. Five, if I'm getting it correctly. There's Kelly Olynyk and Andrew Nembhard are both representing Canada. Rui Hachimura is representing Japan. Filip Petrusev is representing Serbia, and then Yvonne Ejim is representing the women's national team for Canada. There was a couple others that would have made it had their countries qualified. Domantas Sabonis for Lithuania is the most notable example there. Angel Nunez, who played briefly at Gonzaga, and I think about 10 years ago, he was on the Puerto Rican team, but they did not qualify. So there's quite a few. I think it's a fun element of Gonzaga basketball in general. Is just how international their recruiting has always been, and there are other guys who I think could have made it or came close, like Joel Ayayi for France.
Hmm.
Killian Tilly potentially, health issues for him, but yeah, it's fun to see every couple of years when the Olympics roll around to see how well represented Gonzaga players are globally.
What is it about Gonzaga that makes their game translate so well to the national stage, to the global game?
That's a good question. I think FIBA is a little bit different than the NBA. Gonzaga does run. Sometimes people say an NBA style offense. It's not exactly. It's more NBA style than a lot of other college basketball programs. Like if you were to watch Gonzaga versus St. Mary's or Virginia or some of those other programs that run these really slow, methodical, very different styles that you don't see at all in the modern NBA just because college rules are different. But Gonzaga is in
Hmm.
Arizona, where of course Tommy Lloyd came from Gonzaga, so that makes sense. They run more kind of NBA up tempo styles, and so I think that helps those players kind of translate to that level. They also just have a lot of talent. They're just good basketball players, and it's always going to help there. But you even watch Team USA, where Mark Few's an assistant coach, and you can see some kind of Zag elements to some of the stuff that they're running with that roster right now.
Okay, because I always feel like every year, I always feel like Kelly Olynyk's always on an Olympic team.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Pangos is always
Yep.
playing for like Canada or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Like I always just feel like every year there's always some notable Gonzaga. This year
Mm-hmm.
it's like Ryan Nemhart.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's always just somebody that just comes along and plays on the national team that I'm just like, dang, like good for you guys. Like putting on for the city.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, real quick, explain to the people. Okay, so Julian Strawber
Mm-hmm.
is gonna probably take on the starter role this year at the two guard, or he has the chance to
Mm-hmm.
during the training camp.
Mm-hmm.
Explain to the people in Denver that have not maybe seen his game who Julian Strawber is and what you've seen.
Yeah, he looked outstanding in the two games in summer league that he played. I think he's going to be competing with Christian Braun for that starting spot, but he's absolutely in the mix there. And I think what was cool about what Denver did is they wanted to give him an opportunity to play a role different than what we've kind of seen him do at the NBA level, even different than what he did at Gonzaga. They
Gonzaga,
put the
yeah.
ball in his hand, they let him play more of a featured role, and he really thrived in that environment. He's a phenomenal 3 point shooter. He can shoot off the bounce. He can shoot off the dribble. He can catch and shoot. He's good at getting attacking closeouts. His floater game is exceptional. He was had one of the best floaters in all of college basketball, and I think that's going to translate. He's not the strongest guy in the world. He's not the biggest leaper, but when you have the ability to get into the lane and score over bigger guys because you can put that little floater up, that is huge, and he has the ability to do that. I think he's improved his physicality to the point where he's a better defender. I think that was kind of one of the concerns about him coming into the NBA, and he looks like he's going to be more capable of contributing on both ends of the floor. Whatever role he has for Denver next year, he's going to be a contributor for them. I think he's going to be a solid outside shooter, a capable defender. I love the pick for him. We've seen Denver really succeed with those late first round picks in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
They've pretty much hit them all out of the park, and I'm not surprised at all that Julian looks like the next success story for the Nuggets.
Yes, you see, I've been trying to tell everybody. I'm like, yo, we watched him at Gonzaga,
Yeah.
but so mm, Brady, who I'm his producer during the daytime for our sports show, he brought up this week about him playing point guard for
Hmm.
the Denver Nuggets, and I was like, like
Hmm.
when we watched him, he was like a three guard, but
Yeah.
that was because we had Nemhard, we
Hmm.
had what was the Jalen Suggs. We've
Hmm.
had multiple different point guards. Not saying that like that Julian couldn't have done it, but
Hmm.
we just had so many good point guards in the last like 5 to 7 years
Yeah.
that it's just like we don't need you to play point guard. So like,
Hmm.
e- can he play point guard? Like, is that something that Julian can do? Do you think?
I think he probably could. Yeah, like you, I mean, you're absolutely right. He hasn't. We just haven't seen him do that. It doesn't mean that he can't. And I think that's part of what this summer league experience was about, was giving him that opportunity to do that. And Denver had some other point guards on their summer league roster. They had Trey Alexander from Creighton, who I think is a very good player, who kind of was able to do that quite capably. But I think that this makes sense for Denver to give him the opportunity to at least try it. He's not going to be like the best ball handler in the league. He's not going to be the best ball handler on
Hmm.
that team. He's probably going to, it's going to be some growing pains if they do utilize him in that role. But in certain lineups, absolutely, I think he's capable of doing that and making the right reads and getting the team into their sets. And potentially, he's valuable because he's not only a point guard who can get downhill and score, but he can hit three as well. So I think he's somebody who could fill that role. I don't think it's the best way to utilize him, but hey, I'm going to trust Michael Malone and that Denver staff to figure it out with him too.
Most definitely. Okay, so back on like more on the Gonzaga wave, even though it was not like it was not a Gonzaga wave, but Dick Vitale wrote an
Mm-hmm.
article in the in ESPN about
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 days ago, and he ranked Gonzaga eighth
Mm-hmm.
out of 16 teams that he expects to see in the Sweet 16.
Mm-hmm.
Explain how this team is better than last year's team and what to expect.
Yeah, I think roster continuity is such a vital thing in the modern college basketball space. Just being able to keep your core group together. We saw that last year where this Gonzaga team was obviously talented, but you had a new point guard in Ryan Nembhard who hadn't been in the system before. You had a new center in Graham Ike who hadn't been in the system before. You had Nolan Hickman adjusting to a new role as a two guard. You had Anton Watson taking on a bigger offensive role. Like you had so many different things. And then, of course, Dusty Stromer stepping into the starting role, which wasn't expected because of the Steel Ventures injury. So basically, all five of your starters were either fully new to the program or were new to their roles. And I mean, the growing pains in the first half of last year were prominent, significant. The loss to Washington, the losses in Maui, the loss to UConn, San Diego State, like they struggled. And then when they found it, boy, did they find it. And they became a Sweet 16 team, had all that success in the second half of the year. Well, I think that's more likely what this next year is going to look like because basically everybody's back. And that's not to discredit Anton Watson, who is a massive loss for this program on both ends of the floor, particularly defensively. But you look at this roster and you bring back four of your five starters. You bring back Dusty Stromer. You bring back Steel Venters effectively. He's kind of like a new player for the roster this year. And then you add a tremendous scorer and rebounder in Michael Ajayi out of Pepperdine, a guy who he's not going to be the same caliber of defender as Anton, and that's more of a compliment to Anton than a knock on Ajayi. Just Anton was one of the best, but he's a prolific scorer. He's a good three-point shooter. He's a big-bodied guy who I think can play the three or the four. You add Caliph Battle from Arkansas, a guy who dropped 41 points in an SEC game last year against Vanderbilt. I think he averaged 30 over his last 7 games. Last year's Gonzaga team had no depth coming off the bench. And this
Hmm.
year, you're probably going to have a guy who was a 30-point per game scorer for a 2 week stretch out of the SEC. Like, that's a huge difference between last year. And then there's more depth options that this team added as well. Emmanuel and Chente coming in, like, again, Steel Venters coming back. Like, I really like the depth on this team is better. And then I think just having so many players who are now familiar with each other, having four guys who have all started and played together who are expected to be in the starting lineup. Like, I think the roster is better, but I think it's less about talent and more about having the
Yeah.
same group ready to kind of compete together again and not have as much moving parts like they did last year.
Okay, so my only thing is this was my only thing that I thought about when we kept
Mm-hmm.
getting all these good guys and
Mm-hmm.
everything was Mark Few will play seven guys and be
Mm-hmm.
totally fine with it. two guys come off the bench and everybody else just sit on the bench. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you see a 9-man rotation this year? Do you see a 10-man rotation this year? Like, because there could be somebody we're not thinking about already,
Mm-hmm.
plus the add-ons. Like,
Yeah.
do you see it getting to a 9-man rotation, or are there going to be? Do you see somebody maybe leaving or redshirting? What do you see?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Every year we project this is the year that Marfio's going to play 9, and every year we're wrong. Like it never really happens. So I'm very intrigued because if it's an 8-man rotation, probably one of Dusty Stromer or Steel Venters is out of the rotation, and that feels kind of insane. Like it doesn't feel like
Yes, and
that's
that
yeah.
is my thing.
Right, like how could one of those guys not be in the rotation? And so I think it probably will be 9-ish, but I think one of those two guys isn't going to play as much as people think. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to alternate, how it's going to work exactly, but it's hard. I mean, again, we talk about that starting 5 with Ajayi replacing Watson. We know Caleb Battle's going to play. We know Braden Huff's going to play after a phenomenal year last year. And then you have Venters and Stromer, and it's like how, and that's not even counting in Junsook Yo. That's not even counting in Emmanuel Inocente. That's not even counting in Ismaila Diane, the freshman from Spain. Like, this is a team that's really deep, that's really talented, and I don't think Mark Few is going to make a drastic change. He's been coaching for 25 years and has made the tournament every year. He doesn't need to make a lot of drastic changes, but it will be interesting. I wonder if there's some concern about Steel Venters' health. I think that's a reasonable. They've said he's on track, and I think that he is on track, but on track would put him a year out of his recovery right at the start of the season. So he may. My best guess is that Venters will be brought along very slowly and won't play a ton of minutes in the early going, because otherwise I'm not really sure how this is going to work. That feels like the kind of more obvious spot for a player to not be a big time rotation piece right away.
I see. Okay. Because that was my only
Mm-hmm.
thing that I felt was just going to be kind of weird about this rotation is like
Yeah.
I didn't look it up, but I don't remember the last time Mark Fuse ran a 9-man rotation, if ever.
It's
I
very infrequently.
Yeah, if ever. I couldn't think of a time. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
think of a bench that was good enough. Even
Mm-hmm.
going back to like, I was trying to think about like even Ravio days or like,
Yeah.
or Matt Bolden days. Like I'm like, like what was going on? Like, but let's kind of talk about the summer league and the players that are playing in the summer league now. We have two on Boston. We have Killian Tilly and we have Anton Watson on Boston, and then we have Drew Timmy on the Kings.
Mm-hmm.
We have who are the other two?
Strother is the only other one, and he's
Oh,
not. He's
Strawber,
not. He's
yeah,
not playing
at
anymore anyway.
Denver. Jeez. I feel like there should be like six more, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Killian Tilly and Anton,
Mm-hmm.
as we are recording this, they scored 26 last night, and
Mm-hmm.
Julian Strawber has looked like I don't want to say a star, but he looks like he's going to take that role as the second
Mm-hmm.
guard. Are we in the era now of where I feel like Gonzaga is putting a player in the league every year almost now?
Mm-hmm.
Every year, there's one player in the league going to the league every year. Are we in that era now where we kind of expect that to be happening now, or are we like have we just been spoiled more recently?
I think a little of both. 4 years in a row that a Gonzaga player has been drafted. That's the first time in school history that has happened. Most people didn't expect that streak would continue this year. Watson kind of snuck in at the very end of the draft. I kind of had a feeling he was going to get picked. He just is too good of a player to not get that kind of recognition. So, but yeah, 4 years in a row for a player getting picked is tremendous for Gonzaga. They've had other guys make the league as undrafted free agents. Killian Tilly being a notable example. Joel Ayayi made it briefly in the league as well. I think for Gonzaga, it's a combination of recruiting better talent. They're able to recruit higher level freshmen. They're able to add players in the transfer portal, and then those players, we see them very frequently transfer to Gonzaga and then have a lot of success and move to the NBA ranks from there. So, and I think going back to the conversation we had towards the beginning of the show too about Gonzaga running a more NBA style offense. And again, it's not exactly NBA, but it's more similar than I think a lot of other teams. So I think it's easier for scouts and general managers to kind of get a sense of what their player might look like at the next level. I believe Gonzaga is tied for fifth or sixth, somewhere in there, in terms of the total number of players in the NBA. Kentucky's first by like a huge margin. Duke is
Hmm.
second, and then it's Michigan. They're in there. Arkansas's in there. UCLA's in there, even though they haven't been as good lately. Like Gonzaga's right in that mix with this group of premier college basketball programs, and they're doing it with they got international guys who make the league, they got high school recruits who make the league, they got non highly regarded high school players. Like it's not just their Jalen Suggs and the Chet Holmgrens. Corey Kispert wasn't even a top 100 prospect, and then he gets picked in the first round of the NBA draft because of the success he has. There's the fact that Gonzaga is putting guys in the league in a variety of different ways is just a huge testament to Mark Few's system and how much it works. I mean, they're not just putting dudes in the league; they're winning games at a really high rate too. So it's a testament to the tremendous work of him and the staff in Spokane to get that done.
Yeah, they're really incredible over their 20 something years. 20, what is it, 26 years now?
Yeah.
Going to that's just ridiculous. As long as I've been alive, I had coach oh, I'm forgetting his name now. I just had the coach, Eastern Washington's coach
Oh,
now.
David Riley, the new
He,
Wazoo coach. Yeah.
no, the new one at Eastern actually.
Oh,
I'm
Dan
forgetting
Monson.
his- Yeah, Dan Munson on. We were kind of talking about that, and I told him, I'm like, I'm 26 years old. Like, I have not seen a year that Gonzaga has not gone to the
Yeah.
tournament, and he like just laughed, and
Yeah.
I'm like, that's just like I don't know anything else other than being good. Like,
Hmm.
that's all I know. My brother is 18 years old. That's all he knows is Gonzaga going to the Sweet 16 every
Yeah.
single year for pretty much his whole almost adult since he's been a
Yeah.
teenager on. And I think that's really cool. Um, Drew Timmy, I got to get on my soapbox. You know how I love Drew Timmy. What is it about? Why is he not getting that shot? He dominated down in the G League. Well, I don't want to say dominated, but he did his thing down in the G League. He showed what he could do. I feel like when he played for the Kings earlier in the Summer League Classic in LA, he did really good. Why does he not get a shot? Not even a two-way shot. Like,
Yeah, I think he injuries limited him last year in the second half of the season. I don't know that he would have gotten a call necessarily, but I think he would have gotten an opportunity to maybe boost the numbers that he'd put up with Wisconsin in the G League, and I think that might have helped him a little bit. But he's healthy now. He looks great, like you said. I mean, the 19-point game he had 9 points and 4 assists a couple nights ago as well. He looks the part, and I think we're hopefully starting to see a bit of teams starting to come around on guys like that a little bit more, because I think for the fear for Timmy and the knock was like, well, defensively, which we can get to, but offensively the fear was like, well, he only scores low on the block, and we're not going to funnel our offense through a big man in the paint, and so if we're not going to do that, what does he provide? And it's like, well, you got to give him an opportunity to provide something else, and what was surprising to me is that narrative still stuck even after his senior year at Gonzaga, where he was pretty much operating out of the high post consistently. Part of it was because Gonzaga's guard play was not good his senior year. They struggled. Nolan Hickman was not able to play the point guard position at the level that I think Mark Few expected him to. And so Drew Timmy kind of became the pseudo point guard. He was bringing the ball to the floor, and they were running the offense, funneling it through him at the high post. And I was like, this is what NBA teams do. I mean, I'm not comparing Drew Timmy to Nikola Jokic or Domantas Sabonis, but that's the role that they play. Is they have the ball at the top of the
hmm
key, they do dribble handoffs, they make reads, they make passes that way. And I have no doubt that Drew Timmy can do that. And those guys are better shooters than Timmy, although Sabonis is not a great shooter, but they are more consistent in that area than Drew. And I think that's an area he needs to improve. But his passing, his facilitation, his just processing and basketball IQ are very high. And he is more than capable of setting screens and pick and pop and hitting open shots and drive, going to the basket if he needs to. I think the big issue for Drew is just defense. If you play drop coverage, he's not a great rim protector. So even, he's not contributing. Like Zach Edey, you play him in drop coverage, at least he's blocking shots. Like at least, he's doing that. Drew's not really that area. And if you don't play drop coverage, he's just going to get put on skates by every single guard in the league because he's not
hmm
fast enough and his lateral mobility isn't really there. So I think that's the biggest issue for Drew. And unfortunately, some of that is going to be hard for him to overcome. It's hard to get a lot quicker laterally. It's hard to get a lot better as a jumper. But I there's absolutely a spot for Drew Timme in the NBA. There's no debate in my mind that there is, and I hope that teams start to see that and recognize that the offensive versatility that he provides is enough to make up for the defensive deficiencies. He's not going to play 30 minutes a night, but you can find a role for him pretty clearly in the NBA.
Yeah, I'm kind of sick of like all of these GMs and all these people that are
Mm-hmm.
saying like, "Oh, he's too old," and
Mm-hmm.
I don't even mean Drew Timmy. I just mean in general. Like,
Yeah.
I just hate when people say that. Like Dalton Connect, people
Mm-hmm.
like that. Like, I heard that was his biggest thing was
Yeah.
he's too old. He's 20. I'm like, he's 22, 23 years old. He's not too old. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're fresh out of college. They are not too
Mm-hmm.
old. They couldn't even probably get it. They like if they would still be in law school right now if they were still going to
Exactly. Yeah.
going to get a doctorate right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hate when people say that they're too
Mm-hmm.
old or that like I do see Drew Timmy's like lateral move or his like I can see how that's a problem. But like Drew Timmy to me is a top three Gonzaga player of all time, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll say top five because I don't want to disrespect anybody,
Mm-hmm.
but like Drew Timmy is one of those dudes. Like I think he's better than oh boy at the Kings, a Gonzaga player. I thought he had a better career,
Mm-hmm.
even though why am I don't Sabonis,
Mm-hmm.
even though Sabonis was only there for 2 years.
Right.
Um, how does where do you see Gonzaga in 5 years from now?
Like conference wise, because that's a big
Just in
question.
general, like what do you see Gonzaga like? Do you see
Yeah.
Gonzaga still like in the same situation? Like, do you see Mark Few still there? Like, do you see
Yeah.
something else? Like, what exactly do you see in like the future of Gonzaga basketball?
Yeah, I think that's it's a tougher question to answer because of the chaos that has been college basketball over the last 4 or 5 years with the NIL becoming a thing, with the transfer portal becoming a thing, with conference realignment really
Hmm.
taking over the way that it has. I get the impression that Mark Few is not super close. 5 years feels like kind of the time period where it's like maybe we're getting closer at that point. I think he's probably going to be at Gonzaga for 5 more years, but I don't think he's going to be there for like 10 more years. Is kind of my read on the situation. He will not talk about it. If you've ever seen reporters ask him about it, he deflects. He says he's thinking about right now, which is true. I don't think he's lying about that. I think he's just focused on what he can focus on right now. So I think I think Mark Few's still there in 5 years. I think Gonzaga's still a premier program. I don't see that changing. They're recruiting at a high level. They're landing transfers at a high level. They have been to the Sweet 16 for the last decade. Like there's no real indication that this is going to slow down. People started to panic a little bit when NIL became a thing and like, oh, Gonzaga's not going to be able to afford to pay the best players and they're not going to be able to land anybody in the portal. That has been proven just demonstrably false. It's not the reality of the situation for Gonzaga, and I think that's a great sign for them. That doesn't mean they won't miss out on players. They always have for forever. That's just how college athletics work. You don't get every player that you want, but I think this program is going to stay at the top of the WCC. I think they're going to continue to look aggressively for realignment options, whatever those may be. The Big 12 seems like it's not happening anytime super soon, but that could change. The Big East is probably waiting to figure out what in the heck's going to happen to the ACC, and if that means they can go get a Louisville or a Syracuse or somebody like that back into their conference. So they're probably kind of playing a waiting game right now. If the ACC blows up and Stanford and Cal come back and join Washington State and Oregon State, maybe there's a conference there that Gonzaga wants to get in on. But ultimately, my best guess is that 5 years from now, Mark Few's still the coach. Gonzaga's still in the WCC. They're still making the NCAA tournament every single year, and they're still competing for national championships. It's kind of a boring answer, but for how consistent this program has been, there's no real reason to expect it to change dramatically anytime soon.
I seen that as a mailbag question, and I wasn't sure. I thought it was a good mailbag question. So whoever had that mailbag
Mm-hmm.
question, I really appreciate you. Um, from the beginning to like right now, what has been the biggest like change in your perspective on Gonzaga sports? Like, what is one thing that you came in thinking that now is totally different now?
It's a good question. Obviously, my role within Gonzaga's like my role as a fan of Gonzaga has changed dramatically from going from being a student, and then I was a student for 3 years, and then my senior year I was on the Kennel Club board, so I had more of a role. I was leading the cheers at the games and more invested in the team. I was the women's sports coordinator, so I was more invested in the women's basketball team that year as well. And then I was just an alumni and a young alumni fan of the team. And then I started podcasting about the team. And then I got Locked On Zags and I got more involved. And now I'm, talking to players and I know coaches and I have more of a connection to the program, get into the press room, and I'm able to do that. And so it has changed just my view of everything. I think I have more of a less direct emotional connection. Like my emotions around Gonzaga winning or losing are still very strong, but it's almost like it's somewhat work related in a way. Like I remember watching the San Diego State game when they lost that game, and I was pissed. I was frustrated. I was with my family and trying to avoid swearing in front of my 2-year-old nephew. But it was partly because I was a fan, but it was also like, I have to do a show about this tomorrow, and I know that there's going to be a lot of conversation about like, is this the end? Is this team not going to make the tournament? And I just I don't like having those conversations. I'm a positive person, so I like being positive. So I'm still a fan of the team. I still feel heartache when they lose. I still feel like jubilation when they win. Like that hasn't changed, but some of the framework around how I think about the team's wins and losses and their off season and stuff is kind of framed more around what it means for me professionally and what it means for my job covering the team. And I don't think that's a bad change. And I've covered other teams in the past. I covered the Seattle Seahawks for a while, and in that situation, my fandom just kind of almost went away. I wasn't a huge Seahawks fan to begin with, so that was part of it. But I'm never going to lose my Gonzaga fandom. They're the one team I can cover, and I won't get jaded to the point where I don't care about them winning or losing. But it still is different than it was before.
It's good. I like that. I like that answer. Okay. Couple more real quick, then I'll let you go. What is Gonzaga's biggest strength this year to you, and what is their biggest weakness?
Ooh, those are good questions. Strength, veteran experience, I guess, is the best way to put it. I think, again, we talked about the continuity a little bit, but I think this team is so dynamic in how they can beat you offensively, and they know that. They don't, last year's roster was a lot of the same players, and they had that strength, but they didn't know how to do it yet. They didn't know, teams figured out, or Ryan Nembhard's not a very confident shooter, and they attacked him and they forced him to shoot, and Gonzaga couldn't adjust. It took them about a half a year to figure out how to adjust to that. That's not going to be a problem this year. They're not, they're prepared for how teams are going to attack them. And so I think having that experience, that continuity is the biggest sale. And then depth. I mean, the depth on this roster is unbelievable. The amount of different starting lineups they could do, the amount of different lineups in general that they're capable of doing is significant, and I think is going to be a huge challenge for opposing teams who are well, we can throw bigs at them so they can't play a huge lineup. It's okay, they'll go 3 guards, Ben Gregg, and they'll play Greg at the 5, 3 guards, and Michael Ajayi, and they'll just outrun you. They can do so many different things lineup wise and just flexibility wise. And then weaknesses, I'm a little concerned about the defense. They weren't a great defensive team last year, and they lost their best defensive player and Anton Watson. Nembhard and Hickman are both under 6'3", and so even though they're decent defensive players, they're just going to get bullied by bigger guards. You don't see a lot of those in the conference, but you're going to see them in the NCAA tournament. And if you're playing a team that's got 2 6'5" guards, no matter how good Hickman and Nembhard are defensively, you're just going to get bodied by bigger guys. So I think that's my biggest concern. That's why Caleb Battle comes into play. He's 6'5". He can play some of those guard spots. Stromer, I think, is going to need to, hopefully he's already put on about 12 to 15 pounds of muscle this offseason, if not more than that. And then Steele's not a great defensive player, but at least he's a bigger guy. So I think that helps them. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm alarmed about the defense, but I'm a little concerned. And rim protection has been something that they haven't really had since Chet Holmgren departed the program. And Braden Huff and Graham Ike are good players, and they're adequate defensive players, but they're not erasing shots at the rim. And I think certain teams are going to be able to attack them there, and that could cause some problems for them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. Okay, we haven't talked since WSU and OSU, or OSU.
Yeah, it's OSU.
Yeah, Oregon State University. I had to think about it real quick. What were your thoughts on that? And do you see them as a long-term partner? Do you see it just as the 2-year and then they're going to go do something else? What do you kind of see out of that?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they're in the conference after 2 years. I think that generally that their plan is to be in for 2 years and then figure something out, probably with the Mountain West, whether it's a full merger, whether they just poach some of the schools. I think, again, what's going on with the ACC and Stanford and Cal plays plays a factor there as well. If things completely fall apart for them, I could see them sticking around in the WCC, but I think that that's a fairly unlikely situation. So I think it's a 2-year deal for them. I'm excited about it though, and this is good for the WCC. I know
Hmm.
Gonzaga isn't thrilled about it because it hurts them in some ways. They have less non-conference games, which I know Mark Few's not happy about. They're less revenue shares from their making the NCAA tournament. They split that money with 2 more teams now, which I know they're not pumped about. And those are understandable reasons for Gonzaga to not be super thrilled about this. But the WCC needs to protect the WCC, and we've seen conferences cater too much to the needs of their members and not the
Hmm.
viability of the league. And I mean that's what killed the Pac-12 effectively. And so for the WCC to be striking on these programs and bringing them in, and they're adding two more programs after that in Grand Canyon and Seattle U, which I think are great moves for the conference, even if I imagine Gonzaga disagrees with that as well. But I'm excited for the regional rivalry to be back with Gonzaga and Washington State. I'm excited for Oregon State personally, as somebody who's about an hour away from both Portland and Corvallis. Now I can see them play the Pilots and play the Beavers, so I think that'll be cool. I think that it'll be fun to see how many Zag fans are out at that game that they play in Corvallis against the Beavers. But I think it's a good move for the WCC. I'm excited about it, and neither are great basketball programs. We'll see how Wazoo does with a very brand new roster, but they make the conference better, and I think that's what matters.
Yeah, I'm excited to see them all play together. That is so true with you being over there,
Mm-hmm.
them Oregon as well. Like I would
Yeah,
like to see all of those guys play. I think those
yeah,
I'd like to see those rivalries be rekindled, and
totally.
maybe not so much rekindled because I don't know if they were really rivalries, but just like those inner, like close to people, those that 500-mile radius type.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll kind of pivot off of Gonzaga real quick and just ask you a couple more questions real quick. Are you a Drake or a Kendrick fan?
um, yeah, I am supporting Kendrick in the argument, or in the argument, the beef that they're having. I've listened to more Drake music in my life, but Kendrick's a better rapper. I'll say that pretty conclusively. I will say that I watched the show Dave recently, and I absolutely love that show. It's fantastic. It's
Hmm.
hilarious, and there's a lot of Drake in that show. He's mentioned frequently. He's in the very end of one of the episodes. So he's more on my mind because I recently watched that show. But yeah, Kendrick absolutely eviscerated Drake, and it was a very fun day on social media to just see everybody's reactions to that when it was happening. That was I said Twitter's bad. I'm in agreement there, but sometimes Twitter is great, and that was a good
It
day.
does, it does. When you see people in public that you know or
Uh,
that maybe watch your podcast or whatever, what is maybe the most common question people ask you?
Yeah, it's happened more times than I think I would have expected it to happen. I went to the USC game this last year in Las Vegas. My dad and I went down for that, and I was wearing my Locked On shirt, which helped in terms of recognition, and got a lot of people. And most people just say, like, love the show, thanks, high five, go Zags, whatever. There's not a lot of like stopping and questions. I do get some people who like, oh, I'm from here. I love the show. I listen every day or whatever. And I usually, like, where are you from? Like, what do you listen on? I usually ask them questions because I feel like they want to have a conversation and I don't want to just blow them off. So it's like, oh, do you listen on YouTube? Like, oh, I listen when I walk my dog, whatever, those kind of stories. Some people, I've been asked for photos before. That's always fun. Sometimes they ask me while I'm working and I'm like, well, I'm not, can't really do that right now, but I appreciate it. I run into people at UP games a lot, even non-Gonzaga games, just because I go to a handful of Portland games every year. And some people will ask me like specific player questions. I had one guy this was at the start of last season, who was kind of anti-Anton Watson. And I was like, oh, I think he's going to have a big year. And shout out to that guy because I was right. Anton Watson did have a big year. But yeah, it's mostly just kind of, go Zags types of quick comments. But it's always fun when that happens. It's always a cool thing.
That is really cool. I was always wondering like
Mm-hmm.
what people say to you
Mm-hmm.
because I know everybody, even if they don't subscribe, I know everybody knows who, I'm not gonna say everybody, but like
Mm-hmm.
I know people at like Gonzaga know who you are, or
Yeah.
people at the University of Portland, like even us at like the radio station, we might not like be in contact with Locked On, but like we watch like some of the videos and things. I know some of our higher ups do and things like
Mhm.
that. So I know people are always watching. It's just so that's why I always wonder what people say, and like I know people are always looking at those, and so I
It's
just think
funny
it's
for
really
me
cool.
because like I know that I'm on camera. Like I obviously understand that, and even like now, like I'm habitually always looking into my camera. And I noticed I was on the phone with one of my friends a few days ago, and I had it on speakerphone. And the entire time I was talking to him on the phone, I was looking at my camera, even though I wasn't on camera. I'm just used to it, but I don't think about how people will recognize me because for the first 2 years of podcasting, it wasn't a video platform. We weren't on YouTube, and then we
Hmm.
switched to incorporating YouTube into the show. And so I understand it on some level, but I don't really think about it very often. So when people recognize me, I'm like, how do they know? Like they're not hearing me talk; they just see me, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's because people people can literally see me. They can watch me on YouTube, and I don't always. I mean, I make sure my background looks good and everything, but it's still I'm still even though it's been years now, I'm still getting used to the fact that people can recognize my face and not just my voice because that's what I was kind of in my head. I'm like I'm a podcaster, so that's a audio platform, not a video platform. But I'm also a YouTuber, so I got to get used to that.
All right, one more question. What is your least favorite part about the podcasting and things like that?
That's a good question. I guess it would be negative feedback, negative reactions, or just like vitriol. Online discourse is the best way. Certainly, elements of actually doing the podcast can get tedious at times, but I don't really dislike the monotony. Some people are like, "How could you do 5 days a week? Like, isn't that way too much?" And I'm like, not for me. Like it's not because I get to talk about different things every single day. And like, sure, sometimes I feel like I'm just repeating myself or saying the same things, but we get feedback that people on average listen to like 4 or 5 shows a month. Like there are diehard everyday listeners, of course, but most people aren't that, and so it's okay to kind of be a bit repetitive in what I say. But
Hmm.
I think the main thing is just like if I'm talking about something, like sharing my opinion, and sometimes it's a little bit vulnerable if you're sharing your opinion about something, and people are nasty about it or rude about it. Like I don't really read the comments very often. I try to avoid it if I can. And obviously, when Gonzaga's losing or not doing well, and people are just pissed, like I've learned to be like, okay, they're not mad at me. They are mad that Gonzaga is losing, and they are taking out their anger in in an online forum where they can. And it's not, sometimes it's not even, it's the opposite. They're not mad at me. They're actually happy that I'm providing a space for them to kind of
Hmm.
let their anger out. But I sometimes internalize that of like, they're angry about Gonzaga and they're coming at me about it, and it's about me, and it's not. And I've kind of had to work through like, okay, like don't get defensive every time they say like, oh, Mark Few shouldn't have done that, or why are they still playing Nolan Hickman? Like my instinct is to defend Nolan Hickman, and it's like this is like it's okay. Like, and I've gotten a lot better about just with more experience podcasting. You just get more used to kind of knowing that. I use a phrase called the fame tax. And I don't want to sound like I'm implying that I'm famous because I am not. But it was actually coined in Chris Bosch's book. The more well known you are, the more likely people are to be critical or to be haters effectively. And like, I've had agents reach out to me and get mad at me for blasting a player, and it's like they're not reaching out to smaller shows and doing that. Like they're reaching out to me because of the audience and the platform that we have. And so while it was an uncomfortable conversation, like that, you got to kind of take that as like this is a sign of growth or a sign of the success that we have had. And so I think that that's kind of the area that I'm working to kind of get better at understanding, why that happens, and feeling less uncomfortable about it. But it's still not a fun part of the process, but kind of a necessary one.
I think one of the cool things about Gonzaga and what you cover and with college hoops and things like that is Gonzaga is relevant, and it's really nice that they're relevant. So there's always news going on because there's always going to be a 5 star coming in. There's always going to be people wanting to know stuff about Gonzaga.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the Colorado Rockies Locked On, and he doesn't like people don't really like he doesn't get the most views. Like he probably
Mm-hmm.
gets the least amount of views out of all of the Locked On people that I watch. He has good content and he has good like thoughts, but the Rockies aren't good. Who wants
Yeah,
to listen to Locked On when the Rockies are on their way to losing 110 games this
yeah,
season? Like it's not that's not fun. Like
yeah,
as much as your content's really good, like we need people to spend some money. Like
yeah.
and so I'm grateful that Gonzaga is good and that they do what they're supposed to,
Mhm.
and well not supposed to, but that they take sports so
Yeah.
serious. Even though education is the most important thing.
Hmm.
And I just think that's really cool. We have Andy Patton with us. Andy, I really appreciate you for coming on. I always love talking Gonzaga. I
Hmm.
told you last time these are always like the last time was probably one of my favorite podcasts. I always love doing these with you and just like studying and learning about Gonzaga, getting back into it. So I just really appreciate you, Andy.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Like whenever you need me, man, just let me know. Like I love doing these. This is fun. It's a good opportunity to talk outside of just the normal, uh, cadence of my show. It's kind of nice to be in a bit more free flowing conversation. So yeah, I appreciate it and looking forward to the next time.
What can we expect from you? Do you working on anything? What
Hmm.
can we look for in the future coming up?
Yeah, gonna be continuing Olympic coverage as we get into the actual Olympics instead of just the trials, and we get a chance to see, how these guys look in the Olympic setting. I'm going to be tracking that, watching those games, hopefully hosting some game watches on the Discord channel, getting an opportunity to kind of do that. Things will slow down a little bit. August, September is kind of my off season for Locked On Zags, so I'll still do 3 days, 3 shows a week. So still going to be quite a bit of content, just a little bit less. And then as we get into October, we'll start doing player previews, get craziness in the kennel going, all that good stuff coming up, and then writing wise, keeping up with that. Looking forward to getting some fun guests here on the show too. I have a few people I've reached out to, a few people who have kind of pushed me down the line, but are planning to hop on the show eventually. So hopefully get an opportunity. I'm not going to jinx it, so I'm not going to say any names, but hopefully get some fun guests coming up on the show here soon as well.
Most definitely, Andy. You always have some good interviews. You always get players like you get like some of like the women's basketball players that I'm just like, dang, like how did you even get that? Like that's
Yeah,
such a good interview. With what was the Nelson?
Brandon
Is it
Maxwell.
Nelson?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Maxwell. That was such a good interview, and I just appreciate you getting those interviews, and it's just super awesome. Andy, I appreciate you. Thank you for doing this.